This Sunday on Capital Connection, pain at the pump and what politicians in power in Illinois and D.C. plan to do about it. Plus, pandemic politics rage on as lawmakers continue to tussle over whether or not to wear a mask in class or in the House. And the brewing fight between city and state government over who should get how much of the state's sales taxes. It's all coming up on Capital Connection.
From the Illinois State Capitol Rotunda, Capitol Bureau Chief Mark Maxwell is asking the tough questions. This is Capital Connection.
Welcome to Capital Connection. I'm Mark Maxwell reporting from the Illinois State House on this Sunday, February 20th. Democrats in Washington are taking cues from Governor Pritzker, a Democrat here in Illinois. Ahead of an election year that could decide the control of Congress and the governor's mansion, more and more Democrats are looking at ways to suspend gas taxes or freeze them in place, while so many consumers struggle with the rising and record high rates of inflation impacting people's pocketbooks. The Biden administration is taking a long, hard look at suspending the federal gas tax after Governor Pritzker called to freeze the gas tax from rising here in Illinois.
Prices at the pump over the last several months have soared. In Europe and in Asia, they're hitting all-time highs, and Illinois families are feeling the pinch too. We can't pick the ways the pandemic affects our lives, but what government must do is to soften the impact in the ways that we can. So I'm asking the General Assembly to work with me to freeze the gas tax this year, holding the rates flat at the pump and putting $135 million back in people's pockets.
Joining us now is House Democrat and Assistant Majority Leader Jay Hoffman from the Belleville-Swansea area, the Metro East area.
Yep.
How do you see that gas tax freeze playing out, if we do that in Illinois? And if the feds do it, because the Biden administration is looking at suspending the federal gas tax, is there a concern that the lack of revenue drying up might impact our progress on repairing roads?
Well, first of all, we passed a historic infrastructure bill in 2019, and part of that was really bringing up to date, focusing on inflation, where the tax on gas would have been if we would have had cost of living increases. Now, nobody likes to increase taxes. No one likes to increase revenue, and we've seen a huge spike at the pump for a variety of reasons. So I think we need to take a look at making it more affordable for the consumer. However, at the same time, what happens is when you create jobs and infrastructure and you sell bonds, you have to pay for those bonds. And the gas tax in Illinois largely pays for those bonds. So if you're in our area and you had driven on 255, which is a major artery in our area, a few years ago, prior to the 2019 historic bill, you literally would have cars pulled over on the side of the road because they had broken their axles because it was in such a state of disrepair. That now has been fixed. So the issue, I think, if we're going to do it, number one, it needs to be temporary. It has to be very clear that it's temporary, because the jobs and economic development, as well as the sanctity of our roads and bridges, is very important.
In 2019, simpler times, I don't think anyone expected a pandemic, and I don't think anyone anticipated that inflation would become this runaway train. Record levels we haven't seen since the Carter and early Reagan administrations. Right. Was it a mistake then to tie the gas tax increase to inflation? Well,
what had happened is historically, we had not had an increase in the revenue for the gas tax since 1988, I believe. And what had happened is you had seen the amount of money going in for roads and bridges decline significantly. So the idea was, let's tie it to inflation so we don't have to do this over and over. We can keep up with the need of infrastructure improvements on our roads and bridges. You're right. Nobody anticipated a pandemic. Nobody anticipate hyperinflation as we're seeing now. That's why I think we have to take a look at, and I agree with Governor Pritzker, we need to take a look at decreasing the burden on the motorists.
Well, it might not be worth much, because even if there is some offset of lowering the gas tax, we're seeing tensions with Russia and Ukraine, which might drive the price of gas itself even higher. So in the end, the consumer is still forking out more money, and that's the bottom line. That's what politicians are trying to address in the House and Senate this year. What is the driving source of inflation, And can the Illinois legislature really do anything to get at that?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess smarter minds than mine are working on this. So I was in college the last time we had this type of inflation, and historically, you saw inflation by the Fed changing the monetary policy, able to control it. Here, I think what's going to happen is you're going to see the Federal Reserve probably increase interest rates to slow some of the spending. It's hard to really understand when you go to the grocery store and the shelves aren't filled. When you go to a department store and there's a shortage because of the delivery systems running behind. And what I think drives inflation is obviously is want and need, and people buying and willing to pay for it, and prices get driven up. What can we do? I think we can do things like provide some relief, tax relief, to working families in Illinois. We can do something with regard to the earned income tax credit. I would like to see us take a look at that. We can look at issues that have been put forward by Governor Pritzker. At the end of the day, a lot of the inflation pressures are really national, though, and have to be addressed at a national level.
I was speaking to the scope of the General Assembly here. Yeah. The state can only do so much, but certainly there are certain things. Government policies can add guardrails or accelerants to the economy in some ways.
Well, can I go back real quick to the issue of the gas tax? Sure. So whether or not you tied it to cost of living, I think we should look at and could look at, you could tie it to cost of living, but have some ceiling as to how much it can be raised, as
or how
opposed
quickly
to,
maybe,
or how quick it can be raised. And I think that's the discussions we're going to have.
So we could see a modification to the actual tie to inflate the gas tax itself, the calculation.
We're discussing that and trying to see what we can do to help out the average consumer.
The Department of Employment Security went through a nightmare of epic proportion. They had to pay out a ton of benefits. They also had some fraud going on, and now there's this massive debt that they have to pay. Your understanding of the budget process and the federal COVID relief dollars, can Illinois spend federal American Resource Plan dollars or CARES Act dollars on that employment security debt, that unemployment insurance debt?
Yeah, there's no doubt that you can, and other states have, and it has been approved by the federal government in their rules that would allow you to utilize some of their federal money in order to pay down some of the debt for unemployment security.
Then what are we waiting for?
Well, let me just tell you what the scope of the problem is. Number one, the process that we're going through now is what's called an agreed bill process. That means Republicans and Democrats from the House and the Senate, all the caucuses, business and labor, as well as the governor's office and the department have been working overtime to, number one, we had to define the size of the problem, and the size of the problem, unbelievably, is about a $4.5 billion deficit. I've been around.
That's half of our pension payment in 1 year.
Well, I've been around here a while, and we've never seen anything like this. The most that we've ever had to solve was right after the Great Recession, and in 2010, 2011, and that was around a $2 billion issue. This is $4.5 billion. Okay, other states have utilized between 25 and 33% of the federal dollars, ARPA money, that was given to them from the federal government. That here would mean, if you use that as parameters, that would mean between $2 and $2.6 billion towards the $4.5 billion problem. That's still a very significant issue that has to be dealt with, even after using those dollars. So we're in negotiations right now in order to avoid very significant federal penalties and interest payments. We have to find a solution. There's really only three ways that you can fix this, and I've been a part of these agreed bill processes before. You can fix it either by, unfortunately, which we don't want to do, is increase taxes on employers. You can reduce benefits for people who are laid off, which we'd rather not do, or you can use federal money, or a combination of all of that, and using bonding to try and rid yourself,
soften the impact of that,
and rid yourself and pay out over time and rid yourself of the federal penalties and the interest payments that just
borrow
build up.
To pay it down.
Yes, but you don't necessarily borrow from the federal government. You would borrow from the street, and so that is being looked at. We're negotiating currently, and hopefully in the next month we're going to come to a solution that's going to make sure that we don't have to pay these huge federal penalties, these huge interest payments, and we're going to have the solvency of the unemployment trust fund restored.
When he says something, he's not guessing. He's very close to the negotiations, a top leader in the Democratic caucus. You're a downstate Democrat. You're a pro-labor Democrat. Is J.B. Pritzker vulnerable downstate?
Well, I think obviously the pandemic is probably, having to deal with the issues of the pandemic is probably not what he signed up for when he was wanting to run for governor.
No politician would.
No, and so that's been very difficult.
But how he handled it is a part of his record.
And I believe that he had to handle it the way he has handled it. Now,
how do you grade how he's handled the pandemic?
What I would say for him personally, I would give him an A. The problem that we've seen, at least for me, is some of the bureaucratic morass that we've been stuck in so often.
In which agency?
Well, across the board, because they've really never dealt with this before.
But give us an example. What does that look like?
Well, initially, I'll be honest with you, they did the best they could, but dealing with the Department of Public Health initially, because what happens is we have local departments of public health, right? And they're throughout the state.
Counties, cities.
Yes, and then you have the State Department of Public Health. None of them had seen anything like this before, and I understand the difficulty of dealing with it. But sometimes when you deal with these issues, common sense sometimes gets thrown out the window. I never understood why you could only have two people in a boat.
A global pandemic could be disorienting.
Right, and things like what people don't sometimes, I think, where people would believe that we weren't necessarily doing the right thing in the state is things like you can only have two people in the boat. Okay, you couldn't play golf. But
for a period of time, yeah.
For a period of time,
they were putting lockdowns on everything.
On everything.
What do we do there? Maybe someone who'd never stepped foot on a boat was like, that sounds right. Let's do that.
Yeah, and some of those things, I think maybe went a bit too far. But at the end of the day, I hope people just go get their vaccination, get their booster shots, and it's no doubt that it's proven. It is absolutely proven over and over again. If you do, that you may still get COVID, but the likelihood of you ending up in the hospital is remote.
So do the smart thing.
Yeah, do the smart thing. And I think when it comes to those types of issues, I think that the governor and the Department of Public Health has done a good job, particularly in our area, of getting those booster shots and those vaccines out to people. We had an unprecedented effort, and I got to give him credit for this, in places like the St. Clair County Fairgrounds, where the National Guard was brought in and people were able to get their vaccines. It's just, we got to continue to be diligent and be safe.
It is interesting. There's also some pandemic politics happening in this building. Look, we'd all love a guarantee, right? We'd all love to say, I take the vaccine, there's zero chance now that but even the research that came out initially said that's not the case. You're just reducing your risk, right? If you take the vaccine, if you wear a mask, it's all balancing your risk. There are some people that have less risk aversion than others. Some people say, I don't want to wear a mask at all. We saw 7 of your colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle this week say they've had enough. They're going to take the mask off, and 3 days in a row go onto the floor of the House and say, we're not going to wear our mask, daring the Speaker to throw them off the floor. One of your colleagues filed a motion to do just that. What do you make of that?
Well, if the rules of the House say wear a mask, wear a mask. We have so many other issues to deal with here at the state level, whether it's budgetary, whether it's the issue of crime and ensuring that our streets are safe, whether it's dealing with the issues of inflation. Just wear a mask, follow the rules. And is this something that we really need to be debating on the House floor? I don't think it is. We've
just outlined some of the issues of real substance and real impact that will affect people across this state that this legislature is considering. But do you think the mask in some ways has become a political symbol?
Yeah, and I think it's unfortunate. So is the vaccine. And I think all of that is unfortunate. Who would have ever thought, and maybe this is just human nature, I don't know, but who would ever thought that a pandemic would be such a polarizing event between people who believe in vaccines or don't?
Well, there's people also who just have a core belief of individual liberty more than they have a belief of collective conscience or of public health. And they might skew farther that way, so the pandemic might just bring that out of them a little bit more.
And, this is difficult on everybody.
Yeah.
It's been a difficult time. I was thinking the other day, I can't believe we've been dealing with this for a year. Well, then you realize it's been 2 years. You know, it's been 2 years, and it's went very fast, and we're not out of the woods yet. I'm hopeful that now we have it under control. Hopefully, there won't be another variant that spreads through the population. They say it's likely, but hopefully it'll continue to wane, and we'll be able to get back to as much normal as possible.
Some news surprised me this week. Secretary of State Jesse White, who grew up in Alton, would endorse Anna Valencia for Secretary of State to follow. She is from the Metro East area, but lives now in Chicago. You're from the Metro East area. Mm-hmm. Who are you backing for Secretary of State?
Well, Anna's a great person. I really like her. I think she's very good, has a bright future. I live in St. Clair County. Our organization has endorsed Alexi Janulius, and that's who I'm going to be for.
So you're on the other side of that issue. Democrats are having their own little primary. That's maybe the top of the ticket, Democratic primary, really the only open primary happening right now?
I think so. Well, there's the congressional primaries throughout the state. So.
Yeah, the congressional ones as well for the state office. Representative Jay Hoffman, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me.
When we come back, State Senator Don DeWitt takes a closer look at why cities and mayors across Illinois want Illinois to give them a bigger share of the state's sales tax. That's next.